All right, joining us now to discuss, Washington correspondent for Spectrum News, New York One, Kevin Frey. Kevin, good morning to you.
Good morning, Casey.
So we sit here on the precipice of Donald Trump's return to Washington. And I want to start with what Peter Baker wrote for the New York Times. He's, of course, chronicled a number of presidential administrations over the years. He says this, quote, "No longer can the political establishment write off Mr. Trump as a temporary break from the long march of progress, a fluke who somehow sneaked into the White House in a quirky one-off electoral college win 8 years ago. With his comeback victory to reclaim the presidency, Mr. Trump has now established himself as a transformational force, reshaping the United States in his own image. And while tens of millions of voters still cast ballots against Mr. Trump, he once again tapped into a sense among many others that the country they knew was slipping away, under siege economically, culturally, and demographically." Is that what we've seen with these results?
Far be it from me to take on Mr. Baker, but I would say, look, the pushback you'll hear from Democrats, at least to some extent, is yes, it was not a good night for them, but they would argue that this is part of a trend we're seeing nationally where political figures, regardless of their political affiliation, are seeing the aftermath of inflation, that the public is basically lashing out at anyone who's in an incumbency position. And quite frankly, Kamala Harris, whether she successfully or not tried to navigate away from the Biden administration, was effectively the incumbent here. That doesn't discount the fact that people know what Trump is. They experienced 4 years of him in the White House. And so to some extent, one could argue that they are tacitly endorsing another 4 years of what he brought to the job.
Right. And so one of the things that we heard from Mike Johnson, the House Speaker, he spoke to Axios yesterday, basically making the issue-based argument. I mean, you mentioned inflation, some of these other things. He says this, should Republicans hold the House? Sorry, Axios writes this. Should Republicans hold the House? Speaker Mike Johnson tells Axios, it's because the GOP is focused on kitchen table issues over Democrats' emphasis on abortion. Johnson says this, quote, "The entire Democrat campaign was run on abortion. They just ran abortion ads 24/7 in all the major markets, and I don't think that's what people were focused on. I did events in so many cities. It was the same concern everywhere I went. It's the economy and the border, weakness on the world stage, rising crime rates. I think that's what motivated the voters." Now, we have seen evidence that when abortion all by itself is on the ballot, right, voters tend to want to protect it. There were a couple of outliers in the results from Tuesday night, but for the most part, that's what we saw. But do you think his point about how this, didn't transfer to candidates bears out?
A couple points here. One, so I was on the trail with him on one of his last days, and so I would say that the issues kind of fold both ways, because he made a comment about CHIPS legislation in upstate New York that did not bode well for him and his party, because everyone lashed out because of the investments that it means for New York. Mm-hmm. I would say that when it comes to the issues themselves, I believe there's been some studying that if you just looked at the policies that both parties are presenting without the candidate attached, the policies tended to be favorable more so on the Democratic side of the aisle. So, yes, to some extent, when it comes to the issues that were resonating, be it immigration, be it the economy, certainly the Republicans seem to have the upper hand there, certainly in the polling and certainly in the results. There's also the factor that Trump isn't always consistent on the message. And so that adds another complicating factor to Johnson's argument there.
Yeah. So, Kevin, you cover Congress, you cover Washington here from a New York perspective. We still are waiting for final results from the House of Representatives, but it does seem like Republicans have the edge now. We know the Senate is going to go Republican. So the chances that Donald Trump is going to have unified control of government are pretty high. Yeah. What does that mean?
Well, look, so Hakeem Jeffries and the Democrats are still holding out hope that they can maybe flip the House, but certainly the window seems to be closing on that opportunity with every passing day, and as more votes are tallied, there's a lot of reliance in California. Can they maybe hold on to any of those seats? But at the end of the day, as you just hinted at, we're now entering into a presidential term where the Supreme Court has essentially removed some of the guardrails here. Congress is completely different than it was in 2017 in terms of the folks that were skeptical of Trump are no longer in Congress, largely on the Republican side of the aisle. And so you have a lot of Republicans who are going to be, folks like Mike Lawler might object to this notion, but are going to be more than willing to fall into line with whatever Trump decides to pursue. And so there will be simply fewer guardrails here in Washington. Part of the way that the constitutional republic that we have operates is that the president kind of self-regulates to some extent based on norms. And we know Trump doesn't like to pursue that.
Self-regulation. What a concept. Kevin Frey, thank you very much for starting us off this morning. I appreciate it.